Dearest soul, there's a moment that almost everyone misses, the moment when going backward disguises itself as peace. It doesn't arrive with warning signs or red flags. It doesn't feel like failure knocking at your door. In fact, it feels oddly comforting, familiar, easy, like slipping into an old jacket that still fits, even if it never really suited who you were becoming. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. Right now, whether you realize it or not, something from your past may be reaching toward you. It could be subtle. A thought that says, maybe things weren't that bad. A person reappearing with a simple message. A habit you thought you'd outgrown suddenly feeling justified again. It doesn't feel like regression. It feels like relief. But that feeling is misleading. Because what's happening here isn't random, it's not coincidence, it's resistance. Whenever you move toward change, real change, the kind that reshapes your identity, there's always friction. Not just from the outside world, but from within your own patterns. The life you've lived up until now has a kind of momentum. It's built on repetition, on neural pathways, on emotional familiarity. And when you try to break away from that, the system doesn't just quietly shut down, it pushes back. Think of it like this. Imagine you've been walking down the same road every day for years. You know every turn, every crack in the pavement, every shortcut. Then one day, you decide to take a different path. It's new, uncertain. You don't know where it leads yet. Naturally, part of you wants to turn around, not because the old road was better, but because it was known. That pull toward the known is powerful, and it often shows up right when you're closest to something new. People assume that transformation is this smooth upward journey, that once you decide to change, everything aligns and carries you forward. But in reality, the closer you get to a breakthrough, the stronger the temptation to retreat becomes. Why? Because stepping into a new version of yourself requires letting go of the old one completely. And the old version of you doesn't disappear quietly. It lingers. It negotiates. It tries to convince you to stay. Not in obvious ways, but in persuasive ones. It reminds you of comfort. It highlights what's easy. It downplays what held you back. It says things like, you can handle it this time, or just once won't hurt, or at least you know what you're dealing with. And those thoughts don't feel like sabotage. They feel reasonable. That's what makes them effective. Let's take a simple example. Someone decides to improve their health. They start eating better, exercising, building discipline. For a while, everything feels aligned. Then one day, they feel exhausted, stressed, overwhelmed. And suddenly, the idea of skipping a workout or ordering unhealthy food feels justified. It's just a day. It's been a long week. I deserve a break. Again, nothing extreme, nothing dramatic, just small permissions. But those small permissions are often the entry point back into old patterns. And it's not because that person lacks willpower. It's because their brain is wired to preserve what's familiar, even if what's familiar isn't what's best. Now expand that beyond habits. Think about relationships. How many times have people walked away from something that wasn't right for them only to feel pulled back in later? Not because the situation changed, but because the absence of it felt uncomfortable. Loneliness can make the past look better than it was. Memory softens the edges of pain. It highlights the good moments and quiets the reasons you left. So when that person reappears, or when you think about reaching out, it feels like an opportunity. But often it's just a loop trying to restart. The same applies to mindset. Maybe you've been working on thinking differently, more confident, more disciplined, more intentional, and then suddenly an old belief creeps back in. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should just stick to what I know. Those thoughts don't come out of nowhere. They come from the version of you that's trying to survive, not evolve. There's a difference. Survival wants safety. Growth requires uncertainty. And when those two collide, survival usually gets louder. Here's another way to look at it. Imagine you're climbing out of a deep pit. You've been in it for years. You finally found a way up and you're making progress. It's not easy. Your muscles are tired. Your grip isn't perfect, but you're moving upward. Then, Just as you're nearing the top, something calls out from below. Hey, it's not so bad down here. You managed this long. At least it's familiar. You look down, and for a moment, it's tempting because climbing is hard, because the top is unknown, because staying where you are, even if it's limiting, is easier than risking a fall. That voice isn't evil. It's not trying to harm you. It's just trying to keep things the same. But staying the same has a cost. Because if you let go and drop back down, you don't return as the same person you were before you started climbing. You return with awareness, with the knowledge that you almost made it out, and that awareness can be heavier than the struggle itself. Regret weighs more than effort. That's why this moment matters so much. The moment when the past feels inviting again, the moment when giving up feels reasonable, the moment when stopping feels easier than continuing. That's not the time to pause. That's the time to recognize what's happening. You're not being called back because it's better there. You're being tested because you're close to something different. And different always feels uncomfortable before it feels rewarding. Think about learning anything new. At first, it's awkward. You're not good at it. You question yourself. You wonder if it's worth it. But if you push through that phase, something shifts. What was once difficult becomes natural. What was once unfamiliar becomes your new normal. The same applies to personal growth. The life you're trying to build will feel unnatural at first, not because it's wrong, but because you haven't lived in it yet. So when the old life reaches out, it's not offering you something better, it's offering you something easier. And easy is seductive. But easy doesn't lead to change, easy leads to repetition. If you keep choosing what's easy, you keep getting what you've always had. And if you're trying to move beyond that, you have to be willing to choose differently even when it feels uncomfortable. That might mean ignoring the message, breaking the habit, challenging the thought, continuing forward when everything in you wants to stop. Not because it feels good in the moment, but because it aligns with where you're trying to go. And that alignment matters more than temporary comfort. Because comfort is temporary, growth is lasting. The person you're becoming isn't built in moments of ease. They're built in moments of decision when you choose the harder path, because you know it leads somewhere better. So if you're feeling that pull right now, don't ignore it, but don't blindly follow it either. Pause and ask yourself, is this moving me forward or pulling me back? Is this aligned with who I want to be or who I used to be? Am I choosing this because it's right or because it's familiar? Those questions create clarity, and clarity gives you control. Because once you see the pattern, it loses some of its power. It's no longer an invisible force guiding your decisions. It becomes something you can recognize and choose not to engage with. That's where real change happens. Not when the path is clear and easy, but when it's unclear and you choose it anyway. Not when you feel confident, but when you act despite uncertainty. Not when there's no temptation to go back, but when there is and you keep moving forward. You've already done the hardest part by starting. You've already stepped away from what no longer serves you. You've already begun the climb. Now it's about continuing. One decision at a time, one step at a time. And sometimes that means saying no to things that feel comfortable but don't lead anywhere new. Because the life you want isn't behind you, it's ahead. And every time you resist going back, you move closer to it. So when the past reaches out again, and it will recognize it for what it is, not an opportunity, a test. And how you respond to that test will determine whether you stay where you've always been or finally step into something different.